To billionaire Sterling Vance, the world was a collection of assets to be managed. His life was a fortress of solitude, all glass, steel, and polished marble. His days were measured in stock market swings and billion-dollar deals. And his heart? It was locked away, gathering dust. He moved through his mansion less like a man enjoying his home and more like a ghost haunting a museum of his own making. Everything had a place, every moment had a price, and every person had a function. Compassion wasn't a currency he dealt in. It was an inefficient emotion with no tangible return. He believed in control, in order, and in the clean lines that separated his world from the messy lives of others. The people who served him were like the automated systems in his home, functional, necessary, and completely invisible. He knew their names for payroll, but he never truly saw them, not the fatigue in their eyes or the quiet worries they carried. They were just gears in the machine that kept his perfect world running. But what happens when the walls of that perfect world are breached? Not by a business rival, but by the quiet desperation of a little girl. For Sterling Vance, time was money, and waste was a cardinal sin. Standing in his state-of-the-art kitchen, he'd scrape the remains of a gourmet meal, enough to feed a family for a week, into the trash without a second thought. But tonight, a tiny sound breaks the sterile silence. A rustle in the shadows of his own home. What happens when he finds the person salvaging his scraps isn't a stranger, but the daughter of the woman who cleans his floors? His reaction won't just change her life, it will shatter his entire world. The clock on the wall, a sleek piece of engineering worth more than a car, chimed midnight. Sterling was on his nightly walkthrough, a final check of the ground floor. Everything was just as it should be. Art perfectly aligned, furniture untouched, silence absolute. But as he passed the kitchen, he stopped. A faint rustling sound, a tiny whisper of movement where there should have been nothing. His first thought was an intruder, a foolish one to have bypassed his security. Annoyance, not fear, flickered across his face. He moved silently, his expensive shoes making no sound on the Italian marble. He rounded the enormous kitchen island, his eyes adjusting to the dark. And then he saw her. Crouched on the floor, hidden in the shadows, was a small child. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, with big, frightened eyes. In her trembling hands, she held a plastic container he vaguely recognized from the day's leftovers. With a small spoon, she was scooping cold pasta into her mouth, eating with a desperate hurry, as if her small treasure would be snatched away. The sight was so out of place in his calculated world that for a second, Sterling just froze. He wasn't looking at a trespasser. He was looking at a hungry child. The girl gasped, and the container clattered to the floor. Tears welled in her big brown eyes as she looked up at the towering figure of the man who owned everything. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice a tiny, fragile thing in the huge room. Please don't fire my mama. She told me to wait outside. She didn't know I came in. I was so hungry." Sterling stared down at her. He recognized her now, a smaller version of the quiet, almost invisible woman who cleaned his home. Elena, that was her name. A woman he'd barely said 10 words to in 2 years. It had never occurred to him that she had a life outside these walls, a family, a daughter. And in that moment, seeing this child, her child, scared, ashamed, and hungry on his kitchen floor, something deep inside him stirred. The cold annoyance from moments before vanished, replaced by a feeling so foreign he could hardly name it. It felt like a crack splintering across a sheet of ice. Sterling's mind, usually a supercomputer of market data and strategy, just went blank. For the first time in years, he had no idea what to say. His every instinct, honed by decades of ruthless business, told him to take control, to handle this with cold efficiency. But looking at the terrified little girl, her face streaked with tears and a smear of old tomato sauce, that instinct completely failed him. The titan of industry was completely disarmed by a child with an empty stomach. He took a slow breath and consciously softened his posture, trying to look less like the master of the mansion. He crouched down, an awkward, unfamiliar movement for him, bringing himself to her level. "It's all right," he said, and his voice came out softer than he intended, rusty from disuse. "You're not in trouble. Are you hungry?" It was a ridiculously obvious question, but it was all he could think of. The little girl, whose name he'd soon learn was Mia, just gave a small, hesitant nod, still too scared to speak. Sterling's eyes fell to the spilled pasta on the floor, then to the empty trash can where he'd scraped his own dinner just hours before. A wave of shame washed over him. He, who had everything, threw away more than this child dared to wish for. He motioned to a stool at the breakfast bar. "Sit." Mia scrambled onto the stool, her little legs dangling. He opened his giant refrigerator, a fortress of gourmet food he never touched. He felt ridiculous as he fumbled through its contents, a man who hadn't made his own meal in 15 years. He found some leftover mac and cheese, simple comfort food prepared by his chef. It felt right. He clumsily scooped a big portion into a bowl and warmed it up, the beep of the microwave sounding alien in the midnight silence. He placed the warm bowl in front of her with a real fork. "Eat," he said softly. Mia hesitated for only a second before taking the first bite. The warmth of the food seemed to spread through her like sunlight. She ate quickly at first, then slowed down, savoring every mouthful. For Sterling, watching her, it was somehow the most significant meal he'd ever witnessed. As she ate, he found himself asking questions. "What's your name?" "Mia," she whispered. "How old are you?" 7. He learned that her mother, Elena, worked 2 jobs, that she had a cough that never went away, and that sometimes, at the end of the month, dinner was not much more than bread. Each word from this little girl was like a hammer blow to the walls of his gilded cage. He had built an empire and amassed a fortune that was so vast it was almost meaningless. Yet right here, under his own roof, a child was going hungry. The quiet woman who kept his world running was living a life of quiet desperation he had never even bothered to see. In that moment, Sterling Vance realized that the loneliness he'd always mistaken for strength was really just a profound, crushing emptiness. This little girl hadn't just breached his security, she had breached his soul.
What happened next wasn't a slow change of heart. It was a quake that shook Sterling to his core. Seeing Mia finish her meal, a small, grateful smile finally on her face solidified a new kind of resolve in him. This wasn't a problem he could delegate or fix with a bonus in Elena's paycheck. This required humanity. Just as Mia took her last bite, the kitchen door swung open. Elena rushed in, her face pale with panic. "Mr. Vance, sir, I am so sorry. She didn't mean any harm. I'll pay for whatever she—" Her voice trembled as she braced for the inevitable, getting fired. "Elena," Sterling said, his calm tone stopping her cold. "Sit down." Confused, she looked at the empty stool beside her daughter. "Sir?" "I said sit," he repeated, gesturing to the seat. "It appears we have been poor hosts." That night, for the first time in years, Sterling Vance didn't dine alone. The 3 of them sat at the massive marble island, the billionaire, the maid, and her daughter, sharing reheated mac and cheese like it was a feast. The silence was awkward at first, but Mia's innocent chatter slowly started to fill it. She told him about her favorite color and a drawing she made at school. Sterling just listened. He saw the way Elena's worried eyes softened as she watched her daughter. the deep love and exhaustion on her face. When Mia finally dozed off, her head on her mother's lap, Sterling looked at Elena. "This won't happen again," he said, his voice low but firm. Not the hunger, not the fear. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "Sir, I don't know what to say. I'll work extra hours. No," he interrupted. "You'll do nothing of the sort. There's a 3-bedroom guest house on the other side of the estate. It's been empty for years. I want you and Mia to move in tomorrow." Elena just stared at him, speechless. "Mr. Vance, I can't." "It's not a request, Elena," he stated, a hint of his old decisive self returning, but now aimed at a new purpose. "It's part of your new employment package. Your new position is house manager. Your hours will be regular, and your salary will ensure Mia never has to worry about a meal again. I've also arranged for her to be enrolled in the best private school in the city. All expenses paid." This wasn't charity. To Sterling, it was a correction, an adjustment to a universe that had gotten way out of balance right under his nose. It wasn't just about giving them a home. It was about restoring their dignity. And he was starting to realize this act of kindness wasn't just for them. It was for him. It was the first brick he'd laid in a bridge back to the world and back to himself. In the months that followed, the Vance estate transformed. The silent, cavernous mansion began to fill with something it had lacked for decades: life. The sound of Mia's laughter echoed in hallways that had only known silence. Bright, colorful crayon drawings of suns and flowers were taped to the multi-million-dollar refrigerator. Sterling actually started looking forward to coming home, not to the quiet, but to the cheerful little girl who had totally turned his world upside down. He became a real part of Mia's life. He didn't just pay for her education, he showed up. He helped her with math homework at the grand dining table, his complex financial models replaced by simple multiplication. He attended her school plays, sitting in the audience not as a billionaire, but just as Sterling, cheering for the little girl on stage. Elena thrived as the house manager, her quiet competence now shining with confidence. The cough that had worried Mia so much disappeared with proper health care and the absence of constant stress. The rigid lines between employer and employee blurred into something that looked a lot like family, unconventional maybe, but forged in a moment of desperation and kindness. One afternoon, Sterling stood on his lawn watching Mia chase butterflies. She ran over, her face lit up with pure joy, and threw her arms around his legs. "Thank you for my new home," she said, looking up at him with those same big brown eyes. But the fear was gone. Now they held only love. In that moment, Sterling Vance understood the truth. He'd spent his life collecting wealth, but it took a hungry child to finally make him rich. His most valuable asset wasn't in his portfolio, it was the sound of a little girl's laughter. His story reminds us that real poverty isn't a lack of money, but a lack of connection. And sometimes it takes an empty stomach to show a powerful man the way to a full heart. If this story touched your heart, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You help spread the message that kindness is the most powerful currency we have. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. What is one small act of kindness that changed your life? Every story is a reminder that we all have the power to make the world a better place.